My parents said, the greatest gift for your sister's wedding is if you disappear from our family forever. I didn't beg, packed my things, took the keys, walked out the door, closing like a final punctuation mark. The next day, sold the apartment, froze the joint account. I'm Kimberly, and I'm writing this for my new life. One that's infinitely better than the one I left behind 3 years ago. But let me start from the beginning because context matters when you're about to hear the most satisfying revenge story of your life. Growing up as the eldest daughter in the Mitchell family should have been a privilege. Should have been. Instead, it was 26 years of watching my younger sister, Brittany, get handed everything on a silver platter while I worked my ass off for every scrap of recognition. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. Or at least I thought I did until I realized she'd been actively participating in making my life hell. My parents, Robert and Susan Mitchell, owned a successful real estate development company in Denver. Dad built it from nothing. And by the time I was in high school, we were solidly upper middle class. Nice house in Cherry Hills Village, luxury cars, private schools, the whole 9 yards. But here's the thing about new money. It makes some people incredibly insecure about appearances. Brittany was the golden child from day one. Blonde, bubbly, conventionally pretty in that Instagram-friendly way. She played tennis, joined sorority life at CU Boulder, and had a string of boyfriends who looked like they stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. She was everything my parents wanted in a daughter. Easy, uncomplicated, and most importantly, she never questioned anything they said. Me, I was the problem child. Apparently, I had the audacity to be brunette in a family of blondes. I studied engineering at Colorado State instead of getting a more feminine degree. I asked uncomfortable questions about the family business. I dated guys my parents didn't approve of, usually because they weren't from the right families or didn't have enough money. I was ambitious, outspoken, and worst of all, I was financially independent. See, while Brittany was spending her college years partying and finding herself, I was working. I had internships every summer, graduated summa cum laude, and landed a killer job at a tech company in downtown Denver straight out of college. By 23, I was making 6 figures and had started investing in real estate on my own. I bought a small apartment building in an up-and-coming neighborhood and was renovating it myself on weekends. This should have made my parents proud, right? Wrong. My success was somehow threatening to them. It highlighted how much money they'd wasted on Brittany's education and lifestyle. It made uncomfortable comparisons inevitable. And worst of all, it gave me independence, something they absolutely could not stand. The family dynamics really started deteriorating when I turned 25. That's when my parents started making passive-aggressive comments about my lifestyle choices. Why wasn't I married yet? When was I going to give them grandchildren? Why couldn't I be more like Brittany, who had just gotten engaged to Chad? Yes, his actual name was Chad, a trust fund baby whose father owned a chain of car dealerships. Chad was fine, I guess. Bland as unsalted crackers, and about as intellectually stimulating as watching paint dry, but he made Brittany happy. He had the right pedigree. More importantly, he worshipped the ground she walked on and never challenged anyone about anything. He was the perfect son-in-law for parents who valued conformity above all else. The engagement party was where things really started going south. It was this massive affair at the country club, easily a $30,000 party for an engagement, mind you. I showed up in a perfectly appropriate navy dress, brought an expensive gift, and tried to be the supportive big sister, but nothing I did was right. Kimberly, why didn't you wear something more colorful? You look like you're going to a funeral. Kimberly, you need to be more sociable. Go talk to Chad's family. Kimberly, when are we going to plan an engagement party for you? You're not getting any younger. The final straw came when my aunt pulled me aside and said with this pitying look, "Your parents are so worried about you, honey. They just want you to be settled and happy like Brittany." Settled, like being successful and independent, was somehow unsettled. Like my life was incomplete because I didn't have a Chad of my own. But I bit my tongue because it was Brittany's night. I smiled. I played the role. And I went home to my beautiful apartment with my amazing view and my growing bank account. And I told myself that family was family and things would get better. They didn't get better. The wedding planning was 18 months of pure hell. Every single decision had to revolve around what Brittany wanted, which I understood it was her wedding. But somehow my very existence became a problem that needed to be managed. I was asked to be a bridesmaid, which should have been an honor. Instead, it became a new avenue for control and criticism. The dress Brittany picked was admittedly hideous. It was this pale pink monstrosity that washed out everyone except blondes. When I suggested maybe we could look at other options, I was told I was being difficult and unsupportive. "It's not about you, Kimberly," Mom said with that particular tone she'd perfected over the years. "Can't you just be happy for your sister?" Then came the bachelorette party planning. Brittany wanted to go to Napa Valley for a long weekend. The budget for this extravaganza, $3,000 per person. When I suggested maybe we could do something a little more reasonable, maybe a nice spa weekend in Vail, I was told that I was being cheap and ruining Brittany's dreams. "If you can't afford it, just say so," Brittany said with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure the other girls will understand." The thing is, I could afford it. I could have afforded 10 Napa weekends, but the principle of spending $3,000 on a bachelorette party when some of the other bridesmaids were struggling financially just seemed wrong to me. But I paid up because once again, it was easier than fighting. Then came the wedding shower, where I was expected to help coordinate and pay for, despite the fact that Mom and Susan, Chad's mom, were supposedly handling everything. Every week there was a new expense, a new expectation, a new way that I was failing to live up to their standards. The breaking point started building about 2 months before the wedding. I was at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, a command performance I'd been attending religiously since moving back to Denver, when Dad brought up the Kimberly situation. "We need to talk about your attitude," he said, setting down his fork with that serious expression he used when discussing business deals. "Your mother and I have been getting feedback from people about your behavior at wedding events." "Feedback? Like I was an employee being reviewed. What kind of feedback?" I asked, genuinely confused. I had been nothing but supportive, despite my private reservations about the expense and drama. "You seem reluctant," Mom chimed in. "People notice when you're not enthusiastic. It reflects poorly on our family." "I'm enthusiastic," I said. "I've participated in every event, pay for everything I've been asked to pay for, and I've never said a negative word about any of it." "It's not what you say," Brittany said, speaking up for the first time. "It's your energy. You bring this negative vibe to everything, like you think you're better than all of us." This was rich coming from someone whose biggest accomplishment was getting engaged to a trust fund baby, but I kept that thought to myself. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," I said carefully. "If I've given that impression, it wasn't intentional." "The thing is," Dad continued, "this wedding is really important to our family. It's a big social event, and a lot of important people will be there. We can't afford to have any complications." Complications. That's what I was to them, a complication. "What are you asking me to do exactly?" I said. The three of them exchanged looks. Mom cleared her throat. "We think it might be best if you toned down your presence, maybe participated less visibly in the actual ceremony." "You want me to step down from being a bridesmaid?" "Not step down exactly," Brittany said quickly. "Maybe just, I don't know, do a reading instead, or help coordinate behind the scenes." What they were really asking was for me to make myself smaller, less noticeable, so I wouldn't overshadow Brittany's big day with my problematic existence. The successful daughter needed to dim her light so the golden child could shine brighter. I agreed because I'm an idiot who still believed that family came first. But it didn't stop there. Over the next month, I was systematically removed from every visible role in the wedding. No bridesmaid duties, no reading, no special seating. I was relegated to general family and told that I could help out behind the scenes if I wanted to feel involved. The final insult came 2 weeks before the wedding. I was at my apartment working on a presentation for a huge client meeting when my phone rang. It was, "Mom, Kimberly, we need to talk. Can you come over?" Something in her tone made my stomach drop, but I said yes because I always said yes. I drove to their house in Cherry Hills Village, the house I'd grown up in, the one that used to feel like home, but had increasingly felt like enemy territory. Both of my parents were waiting in the living room, sitting in those formal chairs they only used for serious conversations. "Sit down, honey," Mom said, and the endearment sounded forced. I sat on the couch across from them, feeling like I was about to be fired from a job I didn't even know I had. "Kimberly," Dad started, "your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the wedding and about our family dynamic in general." "Okay," I said carefully. "The thing is," Mom continued, "we love you, but we think maybe you need some time to figure things out. Find your place in this family." "I don't understand." Dad leaned forward. "The wedding is really important to Brittany and to us. It's her special day, and she deserves to have everything perfect." "I agree," I said. "I've been trying to be as supportive as possible." "That's just it," Mom said. "Even when you're trying to be supportive, there's this tension, this undercurrent of judgment." "I haven't been judging anyone. It's not intentional," Dad said. "But your very presence seems to create complications. People compare. They ask questions. It takes attention away from where it should be." I stared at them, trying to process what they were saying. "Are you uninviting me from the wedding?" They looked at each other. Mom cleared her throat. "We think maybe it would be best if you took some time for yourself. Maybe went on a trip during the wedding weekend. Something just for you. You are uninviting me." "It's not forever," Dad said quickly, "just until things settle down. Until you can find a way to be part of this family without causing drama." "What drama? What have I done?" "It's not what you've done," he said. "It's who you are. You're different from us. You have different values, different priorities, and that's fine, but it makes family gatherings difficult." The room went very quiet. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the sound of a neighbor's dog barking, the hum of the air conditioning, normal sounds of normal life happening around this completely abnormal conversation. "So, you want me to skip my sister's wedding because my existence makes people uncomfortable?" "We want you to think about whether you really want to be part of this family," Dad said. "And if you do, what you're willing to change to make that work." I sat there for a long moment, looking at these people who had raised me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were basically telling me that their love came with conditions I could never meet. "And if I don't skip the wedding?" Another long pause. "Kimberly," Mom said softly, "the truth is we think maybe the greatest gift you could give your sister for her wedding would be if you just disappeared from our family forever." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I waited for one of them to take it back, to say they didn't mean it, to show some sign that they realized how devastating what they just said was. Instead, Dad nodded. It would solve a lot of problems. I looked at my mother, the woman who had given birth to me, raised me, supposedly loved me. She couldn't meet my eyes. "So that's it," I said. 26 years of being your daughter, and you want me to just disappear?" "You could stay in touch," Mom said weakly. "Maybe we could have lunch occasionally, but the family events, the holidays, the big gatherings, it might be better if you weren't there." I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I managed to stay upright. "Okay," I said. They both looked surprised, like they'd expected me to fight or beg or promise to change. "Okay," Dad repeated. "Okay, I'll disappear." I walked out of that living room, through the foyer with its ridiculous chandelier and marble floors, past the family photos that prominently featured Brittany and barely included me, and out the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't make a scene. I just closed it quietly behind me, like a final punctuation mark on the sentence of my relationship with the Mitchell family. I sat in my car in their circular driveway for about 10 minutes, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Then I drove home to my apartment, poured myself a very large glass of wine, and started making a list. See, here's what my parents didn't know about me. When I'm hurt, I don't get sad. I get methodical. They wanted me to disappear. Fine, I would disappear. But I was going to do it in a way that left a mark. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. Yes, I had a lawyer. When you own rental properties and run a business, you need legal counsel. His name was David Chen, and he was brilliant, ruthless, and very, very thorough. "David," I said when he answered, "I need to know exactly what assets I have legal claim to, and I need to know how to extract myself from anything that ties me to my family." "Kimberly, what's going on?" I explained the situation. There was a long silence. "They asked you to disappear from the family? They suggested it would be the greatest gift I could give my sister? Jesus. Okay, let me pull your files. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" "I'll be there at 8. The next morning, David laid out my situation. It was better than I'd hoped and worse than I'd feared. The good news, the apartment building I bought was entirely in my name. My investment accounts were mine alone. My business was incorporated separately from anything family related. I had about $400,000 in liquid assets and another $200,000 in real estate equity. The bad news, I was on several joint accounts with my parents, including a shared investment account we'd set up for family expenses that had about $150,000 in it. I was also co-owner of a vacation condo in Aspen that we bought together as an investment property. Here's what I can do, David said. The joint accounts. You have every legal right to withdraw your portion. The condo is more complicated, but you can force a sale if you want out. What about the family business? You're not on any of the corporate documents, so that's not an issue. But Kimberly, are you sure about this? Family, spite. This could blow over. I thought about my parents' faces when they told me the greatest gift I could give my sister was to disappear forever. No, I said, it won't blow over. They meant it. Okay then, let's make sure you're protected. By noon, I had withdrawn my portion of every joint account I shared with my parents. That came to about $75,000. Apparently, I'd been contributing more than they had been. I also initiated the legal process to force the sale of the Aspen condo. But that was just the beginning. You see, while I'd been busy being the responsible daughter, I'd also been paying attention to the family business. Dad had always been loose with information around me, probably because he figured I was family, and it didn't matter. Over the years, I'd picked up quite a bit of knowledge about their operations, their clients, and their business practices. Some of what I knew was concerning. The Mitchell Development Company had been cutting corners on some of their recent projects, not enough to be obviously illegal, but enough to be ethically questionable and potentially problematic if the right person asked the right questions. There were issues with permit applications, problems with subcontractor payments, and at least 3 projects where the environmental impact assessment seemed optimistic. I made copies of everything I had access to: emails, documents, financial records, all obtained legally since I'd been included on family business discussions for years and had legitimate access to shared family files. Then I started making phone calls. The first call was to the Denver Building Department. I had questions about permit processes and whether certain recent projects had been properly approved. The second call was to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I had concerns about potential environmental issues at a development site. The third call was to the Better Business Bureau. I had information about potential issues with subcontractor payments. I wasn't making accusations. I was just asking questions and sharing information that someone might want to look into, as a concerned citizen, of course. But that still wasn't enough. Remember how I mentioned I work in tech? Well, my company specializes in data analysis and digital marketing. I'm very, very good at research, and I have access to some powerful tools for finding information online. I spent the next week doing the most thorough background research of my life. I looked into Chad's family business, their social media presence, their financial history, their legal history. I researched the guest list for the wedding, all those important people my parents were so worried about impressing. What I found was interesting. Chad's family car dealership empire was not as successful as they liked to pretend. They'd had several lawsuits over the past few years, mostly related to fraudulent sales practices and undisclosed vehicle problems. Chad himself had a DUI from college that had been sealed, but was still findable if you knew where to look. His Instagram was a treasure trove of questionable decisions and entitled behavior. More importantly, several of the important people on the wedding guest list were people I recognized from my professional network, including 2 potential clients my own company had been courting. This gave me an idea. I started a blog, anonymous, untraceable, professionally designed. I called it Denver Social Truth and positioned it as an insider guide to the real stories behind Denver's social scene. I made it look legitimate, professional, well-researched. Then I started posting. The first few posts were general interest items about social events around the city, complete with photos and insider details that made it clear the author was well-connected. Nothing controversial, just interesting gossip that people would want to read and share. Once I had a small but growing readership, I started posting more substantial content, like a deep dive into the car dealership industry in Colorado, and the legal troubles that had plagued several major dealerships. I didn't mention Chad's family specifically, but anyone who knew the industry would recognize the details, like an analysis of building permit irregularities in several recent Denver development projects. Again, no direct accusations, just public information presented in a way that raised questions. Like a profile of social media behavior among Denver's young socialites, complete with screenshots of particularly entitled or problematic posts. Chad's Instagram featured heavily, though I never used his full name. The blog started gaining traction. People were sharing posts, discussing them, using the information in their own social circles. I had created a whisper campaign that was spreading organically through exactly the social network my parents were so desperate to impress. But I still wasn't done. The wedding was now 3 days away, and I hadn't heard from my family since that conversation in their living room. No phone calls, no texts, nothing. They were proceeding as if I had never existed, exactly like they wanted. So I decided to make sure I really didn't exist for them anymore. I put my apartment building on the market in Denver's hot real estate market. It sold in 2 days for $50,000 over asking price to a cash buyer. I liquidated my investment accounts and moved everything to a new bank. I incorporated a new business entity and transferred all of my professional contracts to it. I hired a moving company and had all of my belongings packed and shipped to a storage facility in Austin, Texas. Then I bought a plane ticket. Austin wasn't random. I'd been offered a job there 6 months earlier, head of product development for a rapidly growing tech startup. I turned it down because of family obligations, but when I called them back, the offer was still open. In fact, they were thrilled to have me and were willing to bump up both the salary and the equity package. On Friday afternoon, the day before Brittany's wedding, I was on a plane to Texas. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I didn't send goodbye texts or leave forwarding addresses. I just disappeared exactly like they'd asked. But I left a few surprises behind. The first surprise was the forced sale of the Aspen condo. Since I was a co-owner, I had the legal right to force the sale even if my parents objected. The property sold quickly, and my parents received a check for their portion minus my legal fees. They also received a certified letter explaining that I was withdrawing from all shared financial obligations, effective immediately. The second surprise came on Saturday morning, the day of the wedding. That's when the Denver Building Department showed up at 2 different Mitchell development construction sites for surprise inspections based on anonymous tips about potential permit violations. That's when the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment began an investigation into potential environmental issues at a 3rd site. That's when several subcontractors who hadn't been fully paid for previous jobs suddenly decided to file liens against Mitchell development properties. And that's when the latest post on Denver Social Truth went live. The real cost of social climbing. A look at this weekend's most expensive wedding. The post was a detailed breakdown of the wedding expenses sourced from social media posts, vendor websites, and public information. It calculated the total cost, around $300,000 for a single day, discussed the environmental impact of flying in flowers from Ecuador and flying guests in from various cities, and raised questions about the financial priorities of families who spent more on one party than most people made in 5 years, while their businesses allegedly had outstanding debts to working-class contractors. Again, I didn't name anyone directly. I didn't have to. Anyone who knew about the wedding would recognize it immediately. The post went viral within hours. It was shared thousands of times across social media, picked up by local news blogs, and became the talk of Denver social media. But I wasn't there to see any of it. I was in Austin signing a lease on a beautiful apartment with a view of Lady Bird Lake, meeting my new colleagues, and starting the process of building a life that was entirely my own. The calls started on Sunday. First Mom, then Dad, then Brittany. Dozens of calls, voicemails, texts. I listened to exactly one voicemail from each of them just to confirm they were as panicked and angry as I'd hoped. Then I blocked all of their numbers. But before I blocked them completely, I decided to have a little more fun with the situation. You see, I had also set up Google alerts for the family business, their names, and various keywords related to the wedding and the blog. So I was getting real-time updates on exactly how spectacularly everything was falling apart. The wedding reception had apparently been a disaster. According to several social media posts from guests, which I screenshot for posterity, people were talking more about the blog post than the actual ceremony, Multiple guests had left early, claiming sudden illnesses or family emergencies. The band had even asked if they wanted to cut the reception short, since the dance floor was practically empty by 9:00 p.m. One particularly juicy detail came from a Facebook post by one of Brittany's sorority sisters who wrote, "Beautiful ceremony, but such a weird vibe at the reception. Everyone was on their phones reading some blog about wedding costs. Made everything feel super awkward. Hope B and C are okay." The post had dozens of comments from other guests, basically confirming that the whole event had been a social disaster. Even better, the blog post had caught the attention of a local news station. Channel 9 News had done a segment about wedding inflation and social media pressure, using my anonymous post as a jumping-off point. They interviewed financial experts about the rising costs of weddings and whether social media was creating unrealistic expectations. While they didn't name my family specifically, anyone who had been at the wedding or knew about it would have recognized the details. The story got picked up by other outlets, including a national personal finance blog with millions of readers. My little anonymous post about one ridiculous wedding had somehow become part of a larger cultural conversation about wealth inequality and social media pressure. Meanwhile, the business investigations were moving faster than I had expected. It turns out that when you give government agencies specific information about where to look, they're surprisingly efficient. The building department had found not just permit violations, but also safety issues that required immediate attention. 2 construction sites were completely shut down with big red stop work signs that were visible from the street. I found out about this because one of my former colleagues from Denver posted a photo on LinkedIn with a caption, "Interesting to see what happens when corners get cut in construction. Safety first, always." The photo clearly showed one of my family's development sites with a stop work order prominently displayed. The environmental investigation was also moving quickly. They had found soil contamination that appeared to predate my family's involvement, but their environmental impact assessment had failed to identify it properly. This meant they were liable for the cleanup costs, even though they hadn't caused the original contamination. The estimated cost for remediation was starting to look like it might exceed $500,000. But the most satisfying development was watching Chad's family's business implode in real time. The renewed scrutiny of their car dealership practices had led to a full state investigation. It turned out that the sealed DUI I had found was just the tip of the iceberg. Chad had multiple legal issues that his family had been covering up, and several former employees were now coming forward with stories about fraudulent sales practices and financial irregularities. Chad's father had issued a public statement trying to distance the family from any wrongdoing, but it was too little, too late. 3 major manufacturers had already suspended their franchise agreements pending the investigation. The family's entire business empire was crumbling, and Chad was looking at potential criminal charges. This meant that not only had my family lost their social standing, but their daughter's high-profile engagement had connected them to an even bigger scandal. The wedding that was supposed to elevate their status had instead made them guilty by association with a family under criminal investigation. I was getting all of this information from my comfortable new apartment in Austin, where I was spending my evenings learning to salsa dance and my weekends exploring food trucks and live music venues. The contrast between their chaos and my peace was absolutely delicious. Mom's voicemail. "Kimberly, what have you done? The building department is shutting down 2 of our job sites. People are asking questions about the blog. Call me immediately." Dad's voicemail. "This is unacceptable. I don't know what you think you're proving, but you're destroying this family. You need to fix this right now." Brittany's voicemail. "I can't believe you would do this to me on my wedding day. Everyone is talking about the blog instead of my wedding. You ruined everything, and I will never forgive you." Perfect. They were finally understanding what it felt like to have someone's very existence complicate their lives. The real satisfaction came over the next few weeks as I watched the consequences unfold for my new life in Austin. The building department investigations found several serious permit violations. Mitchell Development was fined $50,000 and required to halt construction on 2 major projects until the issues were resolved. The delays cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and damaged their reputation with investors. The environmental investigation found contamination issues that required expensive remediation, another $200,000 in unexpected costs. The subcontractor liens froze access to several of their business accounts, and prevented them from taking out loans for new projects. But the social consequences were even more severe. The wedding, which was supposed to be their triumphant social debut, became known as that wedding from the blog. People who attended were embarrassed to have been associated with such an ostentatious display, especially once the family's business problems became public knowledge. Chad's family's car dealership came under renewed scrutiny after the blog posts, leading to additional investigations and lawsuits. The engagement lasted another 2 months before Chad decided he couldn't handle being associated with the Mitchell family drama. He broke up with Brittany via text message while she was at a spa in Scottsdale trying to recover from the wedding stress. My parents' social standing in Denver never recovered. They became known as the family who spent $300,000 on a wedding while stiffing their contractors and cutting corners on building safety. Several of their country club friends stopped returning calls. Mom was quietly asked to step down from the charity board. She'd been so proud of joining. Meanwhile, I was thriving in Austin. My new job was challenging and rewarding. My colleagues were brilliant and supportive, and I was making more money than I'd ever dreamed of. I bought a beautiful house in South Austin, joined a hiking club, started dating a wonderful guy named Marcus who was a professor at UT, and thought my ambition was sexy rather than threatening. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was rather than constantly trying to change me into someone else. But the story doesn't end there. About 6 months after I left Denver, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Kimberly, it's David, your lawyer. Hey, David, what's up? I have some interesting news. Your parents want to settle. Settle what? They're offering to buy out your share of the Aspen property for significantly more than market value. They also want to pay you what they're calling a consulting fee for your help with some business issues. I laughed. They want to pay me to make the problems go away. That's my read on it. They're also asking if you'd be willing to take down the blog. How much are they offering? $200,000 for the property buyout, another $100,000 for the consulting fee. And all you have to do is disappear quietly and stop causing problems, essentially. Yes. I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. Counteroffer, I said. David hesitated. What's your number? $500,000, plus a written apology from all 3 of them, acknowledging that asking me to disappear from the family was wrong and hurtful, and I keep the blog. Kimberly, I'm not trying to be vindictive. David, they need to understand that actions have consequences. They chose to treat me like I was disposable, and now they're learning what it actually costs to dispose of me. I'll relay the offer. 3 days later, David called back. They accepted all of it, including the apologies. All of it? Yes, I have written apologies from all 3 of them, plus a cashier's check for $500,000. What do the apologies say? I'll read you your father's. Kimberly, I realize now that asking you to distance yourself from the family was wrong and hurtful. You are our daughter, and we should have found a better way to handle our concerns. I apologize for the pain we caused and hope someday you can forgive us. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And they understand I'm keeping the blog? They understand, though they're hoping you'll be less focused on Denver social issues going forward. Tell them I'll consider diversifying my content. The money arrived a week later, along with 3 handwritten apology letters that were clearly lawyer-reviewed, but seemed at least somewhat sincere. I deposited the check and bought investment properties in Austin. I didn't shut down the blog, but I did start covering social issues in other cities. Denver Social Truth became Simply Social Truth, and it developed a national following. I never posted about my family again, but the original post stayed up as a reminder. And that brings us to today, 3 years later. I'm 30 years old. I own 3 rental properties in Austin. I'm about to be promoted to VP at my company, and I'm engaged to Marcus, who proposed at the top of Mount Bonnell with a ring he designed himself and a speech about how much he admired my independence and strength. Last month, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Brittany was getting married again, this time to someone named Tyler, who worked in finance and seemed like a significant upgrade from Chad in the personality department. The invitation was addressed to Miss Kimberly Mitchell at my Austin address. I realized they must have hired a skip tracing service or private investigator to find my current address, since I hadn't exactly left a forwarding address when I disappeared. I stared at that invitation for a long time, thinking about what it represented. An olive branch, an acknowledgement that I existed, an admission that maybe they wanted me back in their lives. I RSVP'd no with a polite note wishing Brittany happiness in her marriage. Because here's the thing I learned from all of this. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to walk away from people who don't value you, even if those people are family. My parents asked me to disappear, and I did. But I disappeared into a life that was infinitely better than the one I left behind. I found my chosen family, Marcus, my colleagues, my friends in Austin, people who celebrate my successes instead of seeing them as problems to be managed. Sometimes I wonder if they understand the irony. They wanted me to disappear so I wouldn't complicate their perfect family image. Instead, my disappearance became the complication that destroyed that image entirely. But I don't wonder about it too often. I'm too busy living my actual life to spend much time thinking about the life they tried to force me to live. The Mitchell family wanted me gone, and they got their wish. What they didn't expect was that I'd be better off without them than they were without me. And that, Reddit, is the most satisfying revenge of all: living well. Update. A few people have asked what happened to the family business and whether my parents learned anything from this experience. Mitchell Development Company never fully recovered from the investigations and bad publicity. They had to scale way back, let go of most of their employees, and Dad eventually sold what was left of the business to a larger company. He and Mom moved to a smaller house and a quieter lifestyle. Based on social media, which I definitely don't check regularly, I swear, they seem to have learned to live more modestly and maybe appreciate what they have instead of constantly chasing status. Brittany's second wedding was a small, intimate affair at a local venue. No destination flowers, no $300,000 budget, no social media spectacle. From the photos I may have accidentally seen when Googling something completely unrelated, it looked lovely and personal, and much more like something she would actually enjoy rather than something designed to impress other people. I heard through mutual acquaintances, Denver isn't that big a city, that they speak about me sometimes, usually when someone asks about their other daughter. Mom apparently says I'm doing well in Texas and changes the subject. Dad tells people I work in tech and leaves it at that. Brittany, according to one friend who knew us both, said she hopes Kimberly is happy, but doesn't elaborate. It's not the relationship I would have chosen, but it's honest in a way our family dynamics never were before. They know I exist. They know I'm successful and happy. And they know that the door they asked me to walk through only swings one way. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living your best life and letting other people live with the consequences of their choices.